Council to order. So I'm JD Solomon, and this is the February meeting of the PD River RBC. It's 9:02. Preliminary matters. I don't think we quite have a quorum yet, but we're not anticipating any action, so we're going to go ahead and start. The main purpose of this, and we only have one purpose today, is to go over as an RBC the comments that have come in. Matt Lindberg has prepared responses to each of those. So basically, we'll turn it over to Matt in just a few minutes and then let him go through and kind of walk through what the consulting team sees anyway as the recommendations for what to do with response to the comments. So we need to approve the, do we have any agenda items here to approve minutes, Tom? I guess we do, don't we?
Well, without the quorum, we'll have to hold off until the next time. So
You're exactly right. Okay, so we'll hold off to the next time, final meeting. We always open this with a comment period from the public. So is there any public comments at the beginning of this meeting? If so, please speak up or raise your hand virtually.
I don't believe we have any today.
Okay, do we have any agency comments today before we start? Okay, hearing none, we'll close the comment period. So let me preface what we'll do now to give to Matt is we received, I believe, 3 sets of comments for those at the public meeting. One of those was really a consolidation by the speaker that spoke pretty long at the meeting of his comments. Bottom line is, while all the comments, 3 sets of comments look very relative, very pertinent to what we're doing, we believe all of those comments were addressed somewhere in this large report. So I want to remind everybody that we've spent 2.5 years working on this report. I don't think anything that we have seen, you as RBC members, or anything we've seen from the public says that we need to go backwards or we've missed something major here, at least from the standpoint of what was within our scope and boundaries to start with. So hopefully today you will see Matt present his finding and his recommendation. Each of these comments will be addressed in the appendix of the report, I believe. And even if it's a comment of it's already in the report, there'll be some addressing of each comment. Okay, so with Matt, if you will push us through this, we'd appreciate it.
Yep, you bet. Let me share my screen here. Are you able to see my screen? Okay, cool. All right. Thanks, JD. I thought I'd start really quickly with just a recap of some of the milestones we've reached recently. First, on December 13th, the draft PD plan was released for public review. We held our public meeting at our typical meeting room on January 14th, and there were several RBC members present, and I'll talk a little bit about that meeting here in a second and open the floor if anybody would like to comment on what occurred at the public meeting, but some good discussion. And then the public comment period was open for another month after that, and it closed on February 13th. And here we are today going through the comments that were received. And this image here is an agenda from the meeting. And I actually have that on this next slide. Just for those of you who weren't at the public meeting, this was the agenda we used. Buddy kind of opened us up with some welcome and introductions. Scott ran through an overview of the planning process and what its what its objectives are and where it came from. And then a combination of us went through highlights of the plan. I talked through some of the technical aspects. Michael, Megan, and John talked a little bit about some of the strategies that are in the plan that focus on their respective industries. Buddy talked a little bit about implementation. And so it was a great team effort to walk through the plan. And then Joe gave an overview of the water SC effort. And then we opened it up for public comments and talked a little bit about how to submit comments on the plan. And as JD mentioned, there was quite a bit of discussion during the public comment period. There was rarely a quiet period.
But Matt,
So,
but we did adjourn right at 8 o'clock.
yeah, indeed.
So
Yeah.
just want to let
But
everybody know
yeah.
that.
Yeah, JD kept us all in line, and we walked out of there right on time. So well done. That's right. Um, I'd just like to really quickly open it up and see if anybody on the RBC has any thoughts they'd like to express on the public comment meeting. Anyone like to say anything? Not, I'll just move on.
I'd like to say that the RBC members did a great job on their presentations.
Indeed, that's right. I thought that was great participation. Yeah, that was really good. Okay. So moving on, as JD mentioned, there were 3 written submittals received, one from Brad Turley, who is the founder of the Carolina Wetlands Foundation, I believe. And Brad he came prepared. He came very well prepared. And he had lots of comments and lots of questions and generated, I thought, a lot of really good discussion during the meeting. Becky Ryan, who's with the Coastal Conservation League, submitted about a page and a half, I think, letter with comments. And then Neil Stevenson also submitted a comment. And I'll walk through each one of those. As I look through all of the comments that were received, some of them, I put them into 3 different buckets. One, I considered out of scope. There were a few comments that I thought made some good points, but they're really beyond what the River Basin Plan, at least at this point, is intended to cover. And they were outside of the planning framework. So I'll talk about what those are. As JD mentioned, each one of these comments is going to have a response, and those will be in Appendix D of the River Basin Plan. So one bucket was out of scope. The second bucket, already in the plan. So there were a few comments, actually several comments that, as I looked at the comment, I felt like the plan already discussed the topic that the comment was focused on. And so in our responses, we'll direct folks to where the information can be found in the plan that they were describing in their comment. And then the third bucket, cause for an edit. So there were a few comments that I thought, yeah, that's a really good point. We should add something to the plan to cover that. You'll see that, and as JD mentioned, you all have been working on this plan for a long time. None of the comments that resulted in an edit changed anything substantial in the plan, but they did highlight some issues that were either talked about in the comment letters or discussed during the public comment meeting. So I'll launch then into the,
Matt,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
let me add one thing too, because I failed to mention this in the beginning. So for the RBC members, where we go from here is Matt's going to give you this synopsis of what we think is necessary. We can get your comments today. We will give you back a fresh copy probably within the next week, because we don't want you to vote on something that you can't see the final form of. So you will have an updated plan probably the next week to 10 days, and then we'll bring you back on a call like this to take the final vote. Everybody remembers you've taken a preliminary vote, everybody's kind of good with the flow of things. We'll take one more vote after you see these edits that Matt talks about today, and then we'll be done, at least with the planning phase. So just a reminder, Matt, that where everybody knows where we're going.
Yeah, that's a really good point, JD. And to JD, to pile on that just a little bit, as we go through these comments, you can almost think of this as an outline of what our responses will be. And if you have thoughts on the proposed response, let me know, and we can adjust how we respond to these comments. So with that, I'll walk through first the comments that I felt like were out of scope. So, and I'll go through them sort of person by person. So Brad Turley, you'll see a few from Brad here to kick things off. First of all, the plan should incorporate water quality considerations, and I'm paraphrasing his comment. Some of the comments were a little lengthier, but for brevity, I'm trying to paraphrase. And I felt like his comment, the gist of it was that water quality and water quantity should be addressed sort of at the same level in the plan. And that, again, it's a good point. Water quality is important, but the planning framework, at least at this stage of the game, focuses us on quantity, but quality issues can be highlighted. And we, in fact, have a recommendation that water quality be more fully incorporated in the future. And so that was the response. We wouldn't make any change to the plan, but we'll include that explanation in the response to Brad's comment. Which, one other item on the comment response appendix, I will include the full content of all of the comments, and then a response to each. You'll see today sort of my paraphrasing of the comments on these slides.
Matt,
Okay,
Deborah has a question.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Matt. I just had a question. You said that in your response, you're going to say that we're going to incorporate water quality more in the future.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What I'm saying is, because we are getting ready to, after these comments are made, and we're going to get ready to vote for it. So what does that look like as far as in the future? How are we going to incorporate that? And the reason I'm asking, one, that is an issue of mine as well, one thing, but I've heard so many comments, even though they may not have sent them in. I had a lot of calls about water quality being incorporated more, because if you have water, but it is not good quality water, or it's dirty water, then that's not really water that you can count that you have. So that's why people want to incorporate the water quality. So what does that look like in the future? And thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we might, Scott may want to jump in on this. I'm not sure if he's on or not, but
he is on.
Okay. So there's a couple things in the plan. I mentioned there's a recommendation that water quality be incorporated, and then it's an issue that the RBC will work through in the implementation part of the plan in chapter 10, I believe. There's a process for that. So the RBC would consider, what are some of the water quality issues that we want to address, and what's appropriate for this plan versus, other water quality efforts that are going on across the state, maybe, through different agencies. So addressing, what the RBC feels like is appropriate for the plan, and then identifying some ways to evaluate those water quality issues, and then implementing that. So I can't tell you exactly how it will be addressed, but it is something for the RBC to discuss. And also, if there are going to be water quality, I think a lot of the plans in other basins talk about the need to more fully incorporate water quality. So there would need to be some coordination across other basins. And I just pause there and see if Scott, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, yeah, I certainly appreciate, all the concerns about water quality, but, we've been pretty clear from the get-go that that's beyond the scope of this effort. And unfortunately, we can't, um, that's probably not a satisfactory answer to some people, but we've always been clear that it's beyond the scope of this first iteration of planning, that this was a second iteration topic. Um, what it looks like incorporating water quality in a later iteration of planning, we'll have to, as an agency, define what that's going to look like. We don't want to, there's other work going on in terms of water quality, so we want to be complementary to other work going on, and support one another. And how that looks and how that's going to work, that's something DS is going to have to think about internally and come up with a plan. That's the best answer I can give right now. I don't know if Joe Kuhn is on or he has anything to add to that.
He's not on.
And I don't
Okay.
have a water quality comment, but I do think it's amazing we didn't get a high water comment. As you guys remember in the very beginning, we spent months talking about the flooding conditions, and we even had an RBC member resign because we weren't going to go into the high flow condition, just really focus on the low flow. And so it's amazing to me we got 2.5 years later and nobody came out of the woodwork on high flow, because it was certainly there in the beginning for quite a bit of time. And but we didn't. So I think this one's a lot in the same line as that one. It was on the frame. It was something people were concerned about. But as Scott said, it was clearly out of scope from day one, and we beat that to death in the beginning. So.
And I'll just mention, we do have other water quality related comments that I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. And actually one comment that I felt like could use some additional clarification in the plan itself. So there is an edit that's recommended with regard to water quality. So good discussion. Okay, I'll move on to the next comment. The plan. So there was a lot of discussion about this during the public meeting. The plan doesn't include recommendations to senior officials. When water gets short, who gets caught off first? How do you allocate that water? And the response to that here is consistent with how we talked about it during the public meeting, that South Carolina has a formalized system for how to deal with drought, and that's described in Chapter 8 of the plan. And so there's already a framework set up for that. And second, we didn't identify any significant basin-wide water shortages, even under the high demand projections. So those were the couple of, the outline of response that we thought would be appropriate for this. And it's really out of scope too, to include that kind of recommendation. So those were the two that I felt like were out of scope. I'll spend some time here on, and the majority, I thought, of the comments were really focused on things that are already in the plan. So sticking with Brad Turley's comments, much of the PD River Basin is in North Carolina. Can we rely on those relicensing terms for the upstream reservoirs to sustain our ecosystem? Why isn't this in the plan? And we talk about in a couple places the fact that the basin originates in North Carolina. And we also talk in a couple places about some of the minimum flow requirements, the low inflow protocols that were developed as a part of that FERC relicensing process, and that FERC relicense has that FERC license has a 40-year time span, and those are enforceable protocols. And so and also based on science as well that was conducted during that relicensing process. And we also recommend that there be more discussion with North Carolina. And I guess related to that, there was a comment saying that the plan doesn't identify who's working with North Carolina. And the thought there was, we say in the plan, we have a recommendation to communicate with that Yadkin PD Water Management Group. During our discussions as an RBC, there, folks encouraged discussion with this group. And my thought was that we've kind of addressed this issue. The plan doesn't necessarily need an exhaustive list for reference. We're really sort of focused, at least in the initial stages, on, what groups would be good to communicate with in North Carolina. So any questions or comments on that? Okay, I'll move on, and feel free, if you are working on a comment, I can always go back, but we have quite a few to get through here. So
Matt, we got a couple hands up.
Oh,
or
good.
Eric,
Okay,
Eric's
yeah.
hands up.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question on this thing in the bottom, the no further action responses provided in Appendix D. So I haven't, did you send that out? Did I miss it, or?
No, I'm sorry. I haven't written Appendix D. We've started it, but we haven't completed it. I was waiting until after today's meeting
Okay.
to complete that, just to get your comments and then provide those responses.
Yeah, okay, because I'm looking at kind of like the way these slides are composed. So, for example, the plan describes the minimum flow requirements, so on and so forth. I'm assuming like in Appendix D, we actually say like what those are, or point people to where in the plan that gets discussed, or?
Yeah, I will. And we don't actually sort of spell out those minimum flow requirements, but we do describe that at a high level along with the low inflow protocols. And I will point folks back to where that information is provided in the report in Appendix D.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to look at this from a perspective of a public person who's maybe made a comment or would read these and be like, oh yeah, that's a comment I would make. And then, these kind of responses I wouldn't find them satisfying, but if I knew, like, we know what you mean, but it would, would leave somebody unfamiliar in all these spaces kind of still in the dark, it's okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
No, that's a good, that's good advice. Thank you. Yeah. Yep. There any other questions? I don't see any hands.
Nope.
Okay. All right. There's a series of three questions, or three comments rather, that get at, I think, some at least similar responses. They're on different, but I guess sort of related issues. And you'll see some consistency in the responses to these next three comments. So first, deforestation is a serious issue. It impacts water resources. Why isn't deforestation addressed in the plan? With respect to its impact on water resources, to the extent that historical deforestation has occurred, and it's impacted our stream flows, those stream flows were incorporated into the SWAM model. And so the impacts of deforestation, therefore, have already been, to the extent that it's occurred historically and has been impactful, that's already in our model runs. And then as we look into the future and think about shortages, those historical impacts are a part of those calculations as well. there, as we talked about this comment and some others, there may be some concern about local scale changes that may occur because of some sort of a land use change. And while that's very important at the local scale, this is a regional model that we're running, and some of those local scale changes would have some impact to the model, but would be more impactful locally. And so, that may call for some more localized studies in the future. But, the regional model is really, appropriate for a regional plan. And that's sort of the standard of study in these kinds of processes throughout the country. We do in chapter 2, and spent quite a bit of time talking about this at the RBC, include a subsection on land protection. And we talk about the relationship between land use and hydrology. And in fact, the plan has a recommendation for some additional study that, certainly could incorporate considerations of deforestation. So I'll move on to the next one because it has some similar tones. Drainage projects and unregulated withdrawals have altered hydrology. Can the plan acknowledge historical hydrologic alterations and recommend opportunities to restore natural hydrology? So, to the extent that drainage projects have changed hydrology and have changed runoff characteristics, again, that is part of the stream flow regime that the SWAM model evaluated, and that was incorporated into our future projections. And we also, again, are recommending that there be some additional studies of the link between land uses and hydrology, and ways to potentially restore some of the natural hydrology. And then the third of this series of comments that has a little more of a focus on groundwater. Brad mentioned that groundwater supplies are stable in some areas, declining in others. Groundwater use is increasing. Our current land use patterns and trends altering our natural hydrology or restoring it. And, again, from a stream flow perspective, we already have that incorporated into the model. The groundwater model, once it's updated, recharge is an important part of that groundwater model calculation. And there's a specific tool that looks at the linkage between land uses and rates of recharge. And so you can see the rest of this response outline hits on some similar themes regarding what's in chapter 2 and recommendations for future study. So any thoughts on that?
I have one.
Uh-huh.
Deborah, I'm sorry, this is Deborah again. And again, the recommendations for further study, again, that will be carrying it forward with DES and the South Carolina Water for the further study.
At least in the report, it's something that the RBC could initiate some further studies, but certainly would be done in coordination with DES. And it's possible other basins would want to study that in a similar way as well.
Okay, and included in the deforestation, are buffers included in that? And I'm sorry, the plan is huge, and I have looked over it, but I don't have everything memorized. So
Sure.
With buffers and deforestation, and I guess you're talking about the local, you're saying that if we reach out to our local councils, our local county and city, that maybe we can have regulations made instead of the whole region. Is that what you're kind of focusing on with the local, making a difference locally?
Yeah. So my point on the local is that we're using a regional model that takes a I don't want to say relatively coarse, but sort of a low resolution look at flows across the basin. And there may be some locations, and maybe it's in some higher headwater streams, where you may see some local scale impacts from hydrologic changes or land use changes that aren't reflected in the model. And, for a regional plan like this, that's probably okay. But then if you see some local scale changes that are impactful, that's something that could be dealt with at a local scale. So whether there's some sort of local regulation or some sort of local, restoration project, that would be probably an appropriate place for that to occur.
Okay, and I apologize for the two questions. And buffers, are buffers included? And again, I don't know if they are or not.
I don't think in chapter 2 we talk about buffers specifically. It's more of a broad discussion of land use, and I need to double check, but I don't remember buffers being specifically cited.
Is that a recommendation we could put in there
To
or consider?
Yeah, we could mention buffers in that chapter 2 discussion on land use protection.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, let me just make a note. And okay. Okay, great. Thanks,
Hey,
Deborah.
Matt.
Yeah.
Matt, there was a clarification on the previous slide. If you could go back for a second. That Harper does not currently work for the PD Land Trust. So he used to work for them, now works for Brad Turley. So
Oh, okay. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Just so folks know, I probably won't refer to Jalen in the Appendix D response, since Brad provided some formal comments that we can respond to in Appendix D. This was just for the RBC's info for this discussion.
okay, just wanted to make sure
No,
clarification was made.
Thank you. Great. All right. All right. Another comment from Brad, pointing out that the water management strategy is focused on household use, but ag and industry are the biggest water users. We've seen a big increase in center pivots. Are they needed? How is industry saving water? Can we acknowledge the need for and make recommendations on ag and industrial water conservation? A couple of points on that, and I'll direct attention to chapter 4, where we talk about water demands. And ag and industrial uses are not the biggest water demands in the basin. It's municipal water providers. And then we do talk quite a bit about ag and industrial water management strategies. Chapter 6 includes kind of a lengthy menu of different water management strategies. When we get to chapter 7 and we focus on the recommended water management strategies, those are mostly focused on municipal, and then there are a few industrial water management strategies that kind of rose to the top in terms of RBC recommendations. But there is a note in chapter 7 that, while agricultural water management strategies didn't float to the top, as far as recommended strategies, they are important and can save water and money, and should be pursued as appropriate by ag water users. So felt like we covered this, and we can make a few corrections in our response to this comment. So moving on, Brad said this is the 50-year plan. This is a good point. What's being done to bring in more young people on board to ensure the continuity of the plan? A few different responses. I felt like we hit on this concept in a couple ways. One, the plan has recommendations on how to improve things and recommends that the RBC continue to meet. And the state has a process for filling vacancies. And so as folks, and he's right, folks are going to eventually retire from the RBC. And so we'll need to fill those vacancies. We have a process for that. And also, as time goes forward and implementation actions are taken, there'll be a lot more collaboration, communication. So those opportunities will be made known to folks. So there are recommendations on the continuity of the plan and the RBC. So I'll outline all of that in the response. Okay, and then there's a couple of water quality related comments from Brad. He mentioned that there are a lot of confined animal feeding operations in North Carolina, and that water from North Carolina comes into South Carolina, and that could be contaminated with pollutants from CAFOs. Why is this not addressed in the plan? Again, this is a water quantity focused plan. Quality issues are important, maybe fully developed in later versions, but there are also regulations related to CAFOs that are enforced by DES. And so there's some concern that if this plan were to make all kinds of recommendations about some of these water quality issues that are actually regulated by a different agency, that could create some issues. So that one focuses on CAFOs in North Carolina. Another sort of related comment, groundwater contaminations have been ignored, or contamination sites have been ignored in the plan. Shouldn't they be in the plan if they impact water systems? Again, another water quality concern, and actually something that is regulated by other departments in SCDS. The plan is also regional, so there could very well be some issues on a local scale where a contamination site is impactful to water systems, but then that is likely something that's going to be locally focused actions, but those locally focused actions would hopefully align with the plan's vision. So those two are kind of related. One's more focused on surface water, one's more focused on groundwater, but we have sort of similar structure of response. Okay, then Becky Bryan had, those were all of Brad's comments that I felt like were addressed in the plan, and we could sort of, our response could sort of direct him and others to where that information is included. Becky had several comments that I thought were already in the plan. What are the next steps for discussing water quality in the River Basin plan? Similar to Deborah's question here a few minutes ago, and I'll answer Becky's question in much the same way as we talked about that with Deborah. The SWAM model does not include the Waccamaw River and intercoastal waterway, but it should. We agree. the plan talks about how we need to, or it mentions that we need to include tidally influenced waterways in the future. That is a recommendation that is in the plan. How does this plan address possible summer droughts and water usage? I think that our analyses really sort of cover this. The stream flow regime that's incorporated into the SWAM model includes both drought periods and wet periods. So we have those droughts already plugged in. We also, in some of our projections, have high water usage rates that, and still we did not identify regional shortages. And so I think that we've kind of covered this consideration in the analyses. How is saltwater intrusion affected by drought conditions? Saltwater can migrate upstream. We acknowledge that surface water modeling doesn't include tidally influenced streams, and we have recommendations to extend that modeling in the future. So I'll move on to the next couple of comments. Please consider recommending additional gauges on the Great Pee River for both flood and drought stages. We do, in the context of improving data across the basin, include a recommendation that both stream flow gauges and groundwater monitoring locations are installed in the future. So we do recommend that. The plan does not include an evaluation of permitted uses versus how much water remains unclaimed. And we do, in section 4.2, talk about that. As was pointed out earlier, this is a long plan, so I can see how some of these things may have been missed. The plan does not mention the Winya generating station. If it's not included in the PD plan, please include it in the Santee plan. And in fact, it is going to be included in the Santee plan. The plan does not sufficiently address the high residential density in the future of the Myrtle Beach and Conway areas. When I look back at the water use projections and the population projections in Horry County, it's projected to double or triple by 2070, depending on whether you're looking at the medium demand or high demand scenario. And both of those were, quantified. And it's the highest population growth of any county in the basin. So I think that the population growth does project the high growth in that area. And I'll, again, to Eric's point, identify where these calculations, the results of those calculations are provided in chapter 4. In the high demand scenario, the groundwater in the Crouch Branch area of Georgetown County may reach critical levels. We don't really give this enough weight and would like to see more commitment to mitigation strategies. And there are a few different ways that I thought we could address this. One, we do talk about that issue in both the plan and a couple different locations and in the executive summary. So we tried to shine a spotlight on that along with other issues in the basin. Once the groundwater model is complete, we can take a closer look at what some of the sustainability issues are in a variety of different areas and what the effectiveness of potential solutions may be, and make recommendations along those lines. And then as far as getting basin-wide commitment to mitigation strategies, I mean, really that's a part of what the implementation plan is. for the RBC to sort of be that convener and lead, help lead commitments to those mitigation strategies throughout the basin. So I thought that our response to this good comment could focus on those three elements. Okay, water use for both electric utilities and existing industries should be projected to reflect growth along with population. And chapter 4 talks about what our assumptions were for that. We did project growth in industrial water use. We projected that thermoelectric generation at the HB Robinson plant will be steady into the future. And, all this is based on input from stakeholders. And I think Becky mentioned, well, what if, some sort of a data center comes in? That's a good point. And that is the nature of these plans. They're adaptive. They can be updated into the future. And as, especially industrial, uses, new industries that can change over time. And so if that in the future seems like an area that will increase maybe more than we think that it will at this point, the plan can be adapted. Okay, that summarizes the comments that I felt like were addressed in the plan, either directly or in a few different ways in different sections. Now there were a few that thought would be useful to that would make some cause for some edits to the plan. Brad correctly pointed out, Brad Turley, that the plan only address permitted water supplies. Non-permitted supplies like individual wells are ignored. Should we quantify those non-permitted supplies? And then he also mentioned the disposal of associated waste. The action that I thought would be appropriate would be to acknowledge his point, and then mention that those water demands were assumed to be negligible. And we've talked about this. Alex Pellet talked about this during some RBC meetings, that it's in his estimation, it was really a small amount and it's assumed to be negligible, but we don't really say that in the plan. And so I thought it would be a good idea to add a couple sentences on page 4-1, which is chapter 4 is the chapter focused on demands, just to make that clear, and that we could, revisit that assumption in the future. So the next comment that I thought we could make an edit in response to, Brad mentioned that the South Carolina Watershed Atlas has a lot of really good information and good maps, and he's right. I mean, there's a lot of really great stuff there. Why don't we have links or some of the maps included in the plan? And I thought that the maps that we did include in the plan sort of helped to directly tell our story. So I didn't recommend that we add a bunch of maps to the plan, but rather add a sort of text box in chapter 3 that highlights the South Carolina Watershed Atlas and provides a link to it, along with a little bit of a description of what's in that atlas. And so it adds a little pop of color, a little something to catch the eye, and would direct users to that atlas. I've actually already incorporated this into chapter 3. I wanted to do that so I could provide an example of what these text boxes might look like. And then finally, I think this is the last one, that maybe there's one more that I thought required an edit. So Brad asked about the interaction of water quality and quantity for surface and groundwater sources. And then he goes on to ask about biofiltration and recharge of stormwater. But the first part of that question, I thought, generated a lot of discussion during the public meeting, and between both Brad and RBC members, and I thought could necessitate an edit and a clarification. So in chapter 7, where we talk about recommended water management strategies, we include a couple of statements that refer to the sort of caveat some of the water management strategies based on regulations. So, in capacity use areas, you may have regulations that limit additional use of groundwater, yet we have some recommendations in the plan that we should explore conjunctive water management of both surface and groundwater supplies. But if you have regulations that prohibit additional use of groundwater, maybe that's not a useful strategy. Well, there was a lot of discussion about water quality. So if we're encouraging more use of surface water or more use of groundwater to supplement our supplies, then that the quality of those new supplies needs to be adequate for its use. And so I thought that what we could do in chapter 7 is add a highlight box that calls attention to some of these limitations. So one limitation focused on water quality to kind of highlight that and enhance that discussion when it comes to water management strategies, and also incorporate into that text box then other caveats that are currently just within the text. We could sort of pull those out and incorporate things like capacity use area regulations into that text box. So I wanted to address, add something to the plan to address some of the good conversation about quality and quantity, especially with respect to water management strategies, and thought that chapter 7 would be the appropriate place to put that. So, and then there was one comment provided by Neil Stevenson: please support clean water. South Carolina deserves it. And amen, brother. It can be our response there. So I think, JD, that's the response that I had proposed to all the comments that were received. I will, to Deborah's point, add a note about buffers in chapter 2 that wasn't incorporated in my outline here, but I can add that. So to JD's point earlier, I'm going to revise the report to reflect these comments that that result in an edit. I'll make those edits and then also put together a comment response appendix, and that will be incorporated in the version of the report that we send out in about a week or so.
So let me do this, Matt. Let me thank you first of all, because I thought you did a very concise job. I know a small group of us has talked to you, and we had a planning team meeting last week and went over at least the first set of comments, not all, but I think you did a great job consolidating this and presenting it today. It was very, very concise. Concise as it had to be, right? It had to be detailed because these are meaningful comments. So I want to thank you. I also want to thank everybody on the call, because whether you're part of the management team of this project or the facilitation team or whatever roles, you hate to get to the end of something and find a big gap. And I can say that I feel good that we get to the end and everything that's here we had touched on. There were no oh no moments or oh we missed something, but it speaks great to the quality of all the RBC and those little bitty discussions we had along the way, and a lot of the management team that was trying to really hammer these things out before we got to the end. So I think we are in really good shape as far as not missing anything major here. And
Hey,
I do
JD,
think, yes,
Cynthia had her hand up. Cynthia?
yes.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to unmute. Thanks, Matt, for that summary. I did have a question though, and a lot of the questions, water quality was mentioned. And and I know Scott mentioned it was out of scope. Would it be a better response just to mention that it was out of scope for this effort and why? Instead of mentioning that it would be addressed maybe in the future, because is that actually the intent? For us to address it in the future?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean,
I actually think that's a great comment, Matt, because Matt and I are a little different. I like to use Cynthia, what I call the Corps of Engineer comment. It's like very direct and responsive. And bottom line, like you say, it was out of scope, period. Right.
Right.
So now I do think, as Eric mentioned earlier, people do like to hear the comment addressed or something. So I think we could probably combine that. It was out of scope, and then some of the things Matt said, but not go too far because we can't be defensive and we can't mislead people to be happy now if we don't intend. But
Right, but if it was out
to
of
your
scope,
point,
and we were given a justification for why it should be out of scope, can't we just share that?
yeah, and the planning framework, which was developed, through the PPAC, directs us to focus on water quantity, but also acknowledges that water quality is important and allows and says that water quality issues can be highlighted, but really sort of focuses our attention on water quantity. And my intent was to direct folks to that section of the planning framework. I don't know if Scott or others from the state have a little more background on where that.
I was,
Yeah. Hey,
who
was that? Oh, yeah. So, I mean, JD was part of this conversation too. Yes, right. With the PPAC, it was discussed. There was, a couple concerns. One was just making sure that we weren't biting off more than we can chew to start this process. And I think the other, and JD, you may correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there was some concern by some on the advisory committee, um, about how far to go with incorporating water quality, because it could be challenging. And that combined with just, they already had enough work to do with quantity and getting this thing going, that they just felt like it would be too difficult to be able to do a river basin plan in 2 years. Does that sound about right, JD?
Yeah, I think that's dead on. And probably more specifically, I think, first of all, South Carolina does regulate some quality, like BOD, biological oxygen demand, and others, dissolved oxygen, those kind of quality demands already. But as the PPAC looked at it, there's a whole thing of nutrients that say North Carolina monitors much rigorously than South Carolina. And so phosphorus and nitrogen, those debates take years to resolve. And I think even at that level of whether to regulate those or not didn't seem to be germane to the PPAC and the planning framework. And then you get into emerging contaminants and other things. This thing really can get complicated. So to Scott's point, I think he's right. The PPAC kind of said, let's do this bite size and let the quantity part drive the front end. And then these other things will be evolving and we'll have to address them as we go forward. And it's state law changes and statutes.
And Eric was on the PPAC too. I don't know if he wants to weigh in or.
Yeah, I was just thinking about a way of trying to second Cynthia's comment. It's like I see all the raising of the water quality issues, and it to me, well, it speaks to, somehow people are missing. They're kind of missing that, like, say, when you sit down, you have this plan in front of you, you've never looked at it, and you open page 1, And in there, something says some, speaks to how we're trying to assess quantity to 2070. That's just getting missed. And I understand it, but like it just seems like though like that point is getting missed up front, and then like the whole interpretation of everything in the plan is colored by that. Where it's, everything you read, like, groundwater this, quantity that. Yeah, but it doesn't say anything about water quality. No, it doesn't say anything about water quality. It's like, I guess maybe I'm like fearing the worst in like how people are interpreting that, but, I don't know how we make that more clear up at the front. And I just wonder too, if there wouldn't be some value, like JD, you were just speaking to the, to me, what is the foundational reason why it is that way is because all of these subject areas are gigantic. I mean, all of it. The relationship of, water quantity to quality, as it affects temperature and oxygen and all that, that's a whole big thing. And then there's the whole, external contamination. You have all these new forever chemicals, and I mean, it just, yeah. Can there be some good way to just say like, look, folks, these are all gigantic areas. If we try to tackle 6 gigantic areas all at once, they will all get away. A wise person once said that, if you chase 2 rabbits at once, you'll catch neither. So it's just something like that. I'm not sure I have an answer, but I just feel like something's getting missed here. And that's to me, a problem I hope we can solve, because we've put a lot of effort into getting this all together. And I do think it's been a lot of, great data and just a real advance in our understanding of, in all the basins, not just the PD, but a real advance in our understanding of how much water we do have, and, what the threats and non-threats are relative to quantity. And that's, I just sometimes wonder if that isn't just going out the window in most people's eyes. So don't know if that was helpful in any way.
So, and I think that's great, but I think Cynthia's thing is let's make it as blunt as we can, or to the point of where the scope is defined. And that I guess that's your challenge after hearing this. We've talked about this a little bit too on the side too. So I've got one hand up.
Yeah,
Tell me
Deborah.
Deborah, I'm sorry, Deborah.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to say that I don't believe it's being missed. Thank you, Eric, for your comment. I don't believe it's being missed. I believe everyone understands that this is a quantity issue, but when you have so much of the public right now, that's a big issue of theirs. Even commenting to me, even in these comments we looked at, I mean, these are intelligent people. They're not missing anything. So I do want to clarify that. And with the water quantity and the water quality, they are very related, of course, because when you look at the amount of water, thankfully, we have a lot of water. But if a lot of that is contaminated with PFAS and E. coli, and those are things that we monitor for, besides the oxygen turbidity and everything else, if your drinking water is contaminated, then that water, you cannot count that water as water available, because it is contaminated. And that's why it is so intermixing with the quantity and the quality, and it is extremely important. I understand that this project, and that's what I've been telling everyone, is focused on water quantity, not water quality, but I do absolutely understand why people are confused, that more water quality is not in here. And that is a whole nother animal. There is no doubt. I mean, when you're talking about the PFAS and like I said, the E. coli coming out of the CAFOs, and we understand that is a total different animal. But I believe the mentioning of it here, and I believe some of the statements here, that additions are going to add a little bit about the water quality. I think that's good, but that's why a lot of the questions are being asked. And as part, so I better understand, as part of this PD River Basin Council, after we vote on this, and just remind me, how will we continue to meet in years to come so that we can update this? I believe it was mentioned before that we will. Is that a possibility? Is that what we're planning to do?
That has been the plan all along.
Okay,
And
that's what I
the,
thought.
the caveat still is you've got a new water initiative at the state that replaced the old planning framework, and it will require some money and effort. So that's not been fully mapped out in the reorganization.
Okay,
But that is the intent of being the intent all along. So yeah.
okay, thank you.
Jeff.
Yeah. Speaking as someone that was randomly selected for a 4-year term, so is in this for a while longer yet. I'm okay with saying that we're willing to address water quality moving forward, because I think we had actually discussed that early on when a number of people raised concerns about water quality, and then we, collectively agreed that yes, the scope of this was just on quantity. But I think those of us that were concerned about water quality would hope that we would address that moving forward, because I think that is the next big topic. I mean, I think we're right. We couldn't do that all at one time, but I'm perfectly okay if everyone else is. I mean, my vote would be to address that, and maybe not all water quality issues at once. We said many of those, but one tact for the Basin Council would be to pick one or two, pick nutrients, and leave it at that for one water quality issue to focus at. Because water quality is so big, it might be that we might just have to pick one or two to focus on at a time and work through those and then move on to another one. But in some shape, I'm okay with saying we're looking at water quality moving forward.
Okay, very good. And I do think we're clear in the recommendations. Water quality is in there, high flood conditions are in there, working with North Carolina's in there, and building the tidal models in there, and finishing the groundwater models in there. So you've got really all proof that this RBC is so important going forward. Is you've got 4 or 5 things that this RBC's already said we need to be doing right now the minute this plan's approved. And again, I think it's a compliment to the process we've used to identify all these and not had them slip up on us or say, "Oh no, how did we miss that?" Well, we didn't miss anything, right? You guys hit it on the head after 2.5 years. So, but it's not over. It's not over.
And to Jeff's point, the process that's laid out in the implementation plan with regard to water quality reflects, Jeff, exactly what you said. The RBC will sit down and identify the issues that they want to tackle with regard to water quality, investigate ways to tackle that or to analyze it, and then make recommendations from there. So the one
let me keep us. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
As I said, the one thing I could do
Scott?
that. Oh, was there another comment? Okay, as we said, the one thing I could do to Eric's point and to Deborah's point, like in chapter 1, I could add another little highlight box that just says this plan is focused on water quantity. Quality issues are highlighted in their recommendations with regard to how water quality is handled in the future, using as few words as possible, and just to sort of set that expectation in chapter 1.
I go back to Cynthia's though, and I go back to Deborah's a little bit. These are smart people, and I don't think anybody's fooled by it. I think you just have to be blunt about it. It was just out of scope. I mean, you can add a little bit more flavor to it, but it was just out of scope. Eric kind of said that too, right? We can't take them all at one time. Let me do this. All right, let's catch our breath for a second. Let's get off of this one for a minute, and I'm gonna go around to all the RBC members for comments in a second. But I do want to hear, Buddy and Lindsay were part of a call last week, I believe, where we talked with the planning team just about this. And now y'all have seen part of this once and now all of it once. Buddy is chair and Lindsay is vice chair. What are your overall reactions to what we're looking at? Buddy, you go. Lindsay, you're up. Go ahead and go. I see you on the camera, so go ahead.
No pressure, no pressure. So my thoughts are that as somebody who is involved in activities like this a lot, where there's a lot of public comment, I appreciate the attention to all the comments that's been given. That's not something that I always see. So I think that overall, I feel comfortable with the responses we've given, with the level of, detail and respect we've given to each comment. I will say, I think and I think I said this when we were all talking earlier. There are some comments that we receive that I also receive regularly in my community planning work that I do, that are just going to come up frequently because they're relevant to the community, and who, you know, almost no matter what the scope of the plan I'm working on is, the comments are going to come up because they're valid comments, and you know, people just want to make sure that they're heard in whatever forum they can get them heard. So those were kind of those are my impressions. And I just, again, I appreciate the amount of detail and attention and really respect to the public comment process that has been given here. I think that's important.
Buddy, Chair, what are your overarching thoughts here?
Well, I certainly agree with what Lindsay just said. I appreciate you, Matt, with your detail on the going through the concerns from the public. I would like to have seen more public turnout, but we did have some, so that's certainly better than nothing. And the concern that was out there, so that does mean that our process of trying to reach the outside did reach some. If it had reached a few more, could we have got more comments? You know, I don't know, but we did get comments, so it was effective. It did get out there. I do like the comment that Cynthia said about just explaining why we're going with water quantity instead of quality, because it seems like when water's mentioned, it's always both, hand in hand, seems like, not just quantity, but quality, but just say we're focusing on quality, or excuse me, on quantity. Quality may come later. But yeah, that would be just to have an add-on to that part in what we've done. But and I think we discussed last week, but no really need for a second public meeting because you've addressed everything. I don't think that's changed. Has that changed in your opinion in any way, or are we good? We're still good with just going with what we've got. All right.
Y'all are good. I think the consulting team's good because
Yeah.
I think Lindsay's mentioned this. You keep going back out for public comment, you hear the same comments over and over, and
That's right.
and you get in this loop. The fact we didn't miss anything or have to go back, I think that's important, unless an RBC member feels that way. With that, y'all sound good. Let me go down the list, and some people may be muted, but I've got Bob Perry first as an RBC member. Bob, you have any overarching comments? If you're there, you're on mute now.
Good morning. I have really nothing to add that hasn't been added already. I'm like everybody else. I think water quality is a huge issue, but you have stuck to the charge and the scope that everyone started out with. Let's hope and pray that there will be an effort to address water quality issues in the PD Basin. I'm really appreciative of the fact that Brad Turley showed up. I have met the gentleman in other venues. He's extraordinarily interesting guy, very smart, and he's very interested in Chesterfield County and local watersheds up there. There's no question about that. He has a lot of input up there. He's brought to my attention and many others the fact that deforestation up there is running rampant, and nobody really understands why it is going so fast. It's definitely having an impact on water quality up there. I've seen it with my own eyes. So he's on to something that hopefully will be addressed in the future. But I congratulate everyone who's worked on the plan to date. I think it's very sound. You've hit all the right notes, and I don't have anything further to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Cynthia, you just spoke a minute ago, but anything else you want to add beyond what you've said already about the plan or how you feel
No,
about things?
nothing else to add. Thank you.
Okay. Eric, I got you up next. I know you spoke to, but anything else you want to add?
No, nothing else. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Eric. Hughes, I got you next. Anything you want to add, Hughes?
Hey, yeah, thanks. Um, to kind of mirror Bob, yeah, Brad's got a lot of great comments. There are some things going on up in Chesterfield County, of course. Charlotte's headed that way. Um, yeah, and I think water quality is always going to be a thing. But other than that, I have no other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Hughes. Thank you for being here today too. Jeff, how about you? Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm good. Other than what I've already said about, looking at water quality moving forward.
Tim, you're on. I think that's Tim Brown on the phone. Are you there, Tim?
Yeah, that's correct. I don't really have anything to add to the previous comments.
Okay, very good. Thanks for your contributions too on this whole thing. You've had a great presentation, some good insights you brought to us on ASR and some other conservation things. So thanks on that.
You're welcome.
Hey, JD.
Yes.
Cliff is under Laura. I think he's ready to.
Okay, Cliff, if you're ready, let's go. What you got, Cliff? Let's see. Laura, Cliff, anybody there?
Yeah, the microphone must not be working.
You're on mute. Okay. Deborah, anything else you want to add?
Yes, thank you. I'm on my phone, so I can't see anything else already right now. But when Matt mentioned earlier about on chapter 1 adding, and it may already be in there, just addressing that we understand that water quality is an issue. Having some kind of statement there in chapter 1, I think would be great. So they don't think we're just completely, even though we have it in a few spots in here, they don't think we're completely ignoring water quality. Just add in there, like Matt was saying, we understand water quality is an issue. We understand this, and we're looking at this in the future. But for right now, for this project, it is water quantity we're based on. Just having a statement that we're addressing that we understand water quality is an issue, and we are going to address that in the future. Okay. That would be bad. Thank you. But thank you, everyone. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anybody on the RBC with any additional comments? And then
Michael Abney is here. I don't think anybody's has met him yet since he's joined. So I don't know if you want to give him he took over for John Crutchfield.
You have the floor. I was wondering if you were on, Michael. I didn't see you.
Yeah, I made it, and I enjoyed being at the meeting too. Just wanted to say thank you for including the points about the license and our requirements for it, the license term, things like that. Getting that information out and letting folks know that it is federally licensed sure helps us when we field questions about water quantity.
Good. Now you're a late member. You feel good about the plan, Michael? You good now with things?
I do. John Crutchfield got me up to speed for the most part before he retired, and I've had a chance to go through it. So looking forward to that next draft to review a little more thoroughly.
Okay, very good. I did have Megan here earlier. She may have had to go, but Megan, if you're out there, any comments from you? Okay. And Cliff, I don't know if you're there somewhere, but if you're there, okay. Hearing none. Let me go kind of back through some of the project management team. Brooke, you've been our project manager, kind of looking at it now and at the doorsteps of approving it. Do you feel good about things, Brooke?
Yeah, hi everyone. I feel good about this meeting right now and everything that we discussed in our planning team meeting last week. So great job, RBC. Thanks.
Okay. Scott, how about you? You're kind of our executive sponsor here.
I'm good. I don't have anything else to add. Thanks, JD.
Okay. Joe, you kind of jumped in here near the end, but I know you've got to play politics with all this. We got enough for you here?
Yeah, I just applaud everybody for hanging in there and working hard on this, and Matt and his team being thorough and drafting up some responses to the comments we'd received, and looking forward to the finalizing the plan. And thanks, everyone.
Very good.
Cliff entered a comment because we can't hear him. But I said, not sure why you can't hear me, but a few thoughts in response to comments. Start with a comment that the team was frustrated with constraints the planning process had on not looking at quality and high quantity. That was his comment.
Okay. Very good. All right. Tom, I'm gonna leave it with you. You've been part of the PPAC and this. Is there anything, second comment from Cliff. Provide a link to DES resources on TMDLs for quality issue. Quality issue probably, but okay, we got that. Good. Tom, anything from your PPAC experience or this process you want to add? You've watched this and coordinated this, and maybe add in next steps. We'll be hearing from you, Tom, on next meetings.
Next steps, but I think it's really cool to see how the PPAC developed the framework, to see the framework implemented in the River Basin planning process, and to see this RBC stick it out through some challenging planning issues that we had throughout this process. And you're here, you've got a solid plan. So congratulations.
Okay. And Tom, you'll be sending out a notice of when we get our next, the final edition from Matt, I guess, edited, and then when our next meeting will be, which will be virtual, I believe.
Right, it's March 4th, and I didn't receive any feedback that said we couldn't have that virtually. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with having that virtually on March 4th. We will crunch this meeting and get these meeting minutes and summary out to y'all as soon as possible, probably next week because I'm going to DC in a few days. But that's, I think, all from me, unless there's something I missed.
Matt, have I missed anything from our side of things, from the consulting side?
I don't
Okay.
think so. I think this was great feedback and great discussion today, and just appreciate everybody being engaged, and yeah, providing your thoughts.
Okay. Anybody else from the RBC with anything for the good of the group? Okay. Hearing none, I want to thank everybody once again, and we have done this very efficiently. Thanks to Matt and thanks for the RBC, and we get 30 minutes of our life back, so that's good. I think we're scheduled to go to 11, so we're just short of 10:30. So you guys have a great week and a good rest of your day, and thank you for everything y'all done. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.